So after my tumor was removed, it tested positive for Lynch syndrome. I never heard of Lynch syndrome in my life, but I definitely Googled it. Googled the hell out of it actually, and I was amazed at how many people have been affected by it, how many lives, how many generations have been affected by it. And all this research was relatively new within like the past 15 years. It also explains so much, like, how I got the cancer at such a young age, why it grew the way it did, and how I could get my son screened in the future to make sure that he was protected. Going into genetic counseling, after my degree from Google University, I found out so much more. I found out that there were so many newer discovered genes that no one knew about maybe 2 years ago, and they're constantly finding new genetic cancers and signs of these genetic cancers and how they're detected. Sad part is that the ones that had it before we had this genetic testing, they were almost like sacrificial lambs, because until they found that cancer in them and started tracking those genes, it wasn't known to be hereditary or familial. They could be passed along. But I think now it's just huge that people get tested. It's really important that the potential for you having a cancer, because you can get screened a lot earlier and you can pretty much prevent it. The benefit of getting tested is which cancers you're genetically predisposed to have. That means that you might have breast cancer or whatever else. All that came to my mind once I found out about the genetic cancers was, I don't want this to happen to anybody else. It's preventable for the most part, or at least, able to catch it at an early stage. And catching it between that early stage and catching it at the late stage, there's a big difference in the treatment, your quality of life, even your outlook. So on April 6th, my genetic counselor called me and she gave me my diagnosis. The results were back.
I saw you because you were diagnosed with colon cancer at an early age, and some preliminary testing done on your colon tumor to see whether Lynch syndrome might be an explanation for the tumor showed that it's possible that it was due to Lynch syndrome, but that test was not diagnostic, meaning it couldn't be used to diagnose Lynch syndrome.
Okay.
So I ordered genetic testing for Lynch syndrome, and I also tested 29 other genes linked to the hereditary reason for cancer, and everything came back negative, meaning normal. So before I get any further, what are your initial thoughts or questions?
Probably just why.
The question everybody's got. Yeah, everybody. After a test result like this, it can kind of cause mixed feelings. On the one hand, it's good news that your genetic test was negative, but on the other hand, you're left saying, well, okay, but I'm 36 years old and I have this cancer, so why did that happen? Now I don't know. So I think those feelings are pretty typical, and I can say I talked to lots of people your age with cancer that we go through all this testing and we still don't find an explanation. And it could just be that it was all just chance. We are seeing more colon cancers in younger people, and it's definitely making us wonder why that is, and making us feel like it's especially important for people like you to get out there and talk about the importance of being on the lookout for symptoms that something could be going on, and to be vigilant about screening, especially if you've got a family history. So it's great that you're doing that and sharing your story. Right after your treatment, you're going to continue to be followed closely, but then for the rest of your life, how frequently should you have colonoscopy? So you'll work with your GI team to determine that. And then for your family members, like your son and your siblings, I would say they should make their doctors aware of your diagnosis and of the family history of polyps. And your son and your siblings should have colonoscopy every 5 years, starting at age 26. The reason for that is just that it's 10 years before the age that you were diagnosed. So we're trying to be as careful as possible. And while most people stretched out to 10 years if their colonoscopy is normal, we just don't want them to ever go more than 5. And then extended relatives, like your aunts and uncles, should make their doctors just aware of your parents' history and your history, and then their doctors can work with them to determine colonoscopy frequency. I'm going to put all of that in a letter, because I know that was a lot of information, and I'm going to send it to you and to your GI team.
Okay, I really appreciate it.
Let's go over this misdiagnosis.
So,
Got it.
what would
Is
have
there
made the
anything I
test?
can help you
What would
with?
have made the test come up
Go
positive for
ahead.
Lynch prior?
It can be confusing. So the test that you had on the tumor was not a yes or no test for Lynch syndrome. It just looked at characteristics of the tumor to say, is Lynch syndrome a possible explanation or not? And if that tumor testing had come back normal, then they would have said it's very unlikely that this is due to Lynch syndrome. So we really need to focus on other genetic conditions linked with colon cancer. Your tumor testing basically said it's possible that this is due to Lynch syndrome. This tumor looks like the type we can see in Lynch syndrome based on these IHC kind of findings. But it's never a for sure type test. We do it just on the tumor rather than on your actual genetics.
And even then, it could be some other thing other than Lynch syndrome, something new that they find in the next 5 or 10 years, and they might have just been one of those cases. I guess the same way they found Lynch. So.
Right. It could be that yours really just was. Most cancers happen by chance. So you could just have developed a colon cancer that was not hereditary or genetic just by chance. Or it could be something going on in a gene we don't know about. One of the reasons I did such a big wide test in you is I did not want to assume it was Lynch syndrome. So I tested you for anything I could think of that would be appropriate based on your history, having a family history of polyps, having a family history of some other cancers like breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreas cancer. I did a very broad test. And even doing that very broad test, didn't find anything. But, maybe, like you said, maybe 5 years from now, instead of having 30-something genes to offer testing of, I'll have 50-something genes to offer testing of. And we could maybe do some additional testing.
Okay.
One thing that I'll say in this letter to your GI team is one possible reason that someone's tumor test results could look like Lynch syndrome, even though they don't really have it, is that their tumor could have a mutation in it that the person wasn't born with. So tumors always have mutations in them. That's why they act the way they do. But it's not that your genetics that you were born with in every other cell in your body doesn't have that mutation. And the difference is when a tumor has a mutation, it's called somatic. When you're born with a mutation in all of your cells, it's called germline. The testing I did is called germline testing. That's how I figure out if someone actually has Lynch syndrome. Sometimes they do tumor or somatic testing just to make treatment decisions for someone. It's not always necessary, but one possible explanation for your test results that your doctor talked to you about before is that your tumor might have had a mutation in one of these genes that you weren't actually born with. And that might be getting way more into the weeds than you wanted to get, but that's something I'm going to put in the letter so that your doctor, in case he's scratching his head and saying, well, why did the tumor testing come back that way? I'm going to put that in there for him as a possible explanation in case he wants to dig into it more.
Okay, but that's great. And so it's almost like hair color. I mean, the germline is if you're born with a certain hair color, and the other one is if you dyed your hair,
If
I
it was
guess.
dyed or something.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, or more like if stress were to cause your hair to turn gray, or cancer's always going to have mutations in it. That's a decent analogy. You might get this letter from me and then say, now I have 3 other questions for Megan. That's perfectly fine. If that happens, just shoot me an email because that's the fastest way to get up with me with us not being at the hospital much now. And I will arrange a time to speak with you by phone and make sure I get those questions answered.
Great. Okay, I really appreciate it, Megan.
You got it. Good luck with everything.
All right, thanks, and be safe, okay?
You too. Bye.
Bye.
I don't know whether to say fortunately or unfortunately it wasn't, because I thought I had those answers. So now it's a big, well, what's the cause now? But I'm not going to dwell on that. But I think Lynch syndrome, there's a lot of other cancers or genetic cancers that people need to know about. And so I'm not going to give up on actually informing people, because it's a cheat sheet. You know the answers to the test before the test gets there. And so I'm still going to focus on educating people, letting people know that, hey, this can happen to you. Just getting tested helps you out, and it helps out the outlook of not just you, but your whole family. But like I said, I'm not sure if it was beneficial for me or not, but I'm still thankful to have that test so that I know that there's not a chance that I pass it on to my son or any future generations. I mean, I like to thank, UAB Genetics, Megan Farmer. She's a genetic counselor, and she was awesome. Going forward, I still want you guys to get tested, especially if you have those cancers in your family. If you know, your mom had it, your grandmother had it, your father had it, you know, your aunts and uncles had it. Those are things that you still need to look at to determine whether you need to get tested, because there could very well be an underlying, you know, genetic disease that you don't know about that could really affect your quality of life, actually affect your life, and save, you know, your kids' lives, your grandkids' life. And it makes a big difference. It extends your family tree or makes sure those limbs don't die early.